Over time, money has accrued in these accounts that are in Iraq and that are subject to all of the restrictions that have remained in place because we have not lifted any sanctions against Iran. Over time, as this money has accrued, Iran has sought to use this as a point of leverage over Iraq and pressured Iraq to release this money, to give it back in certain ways, and Iraq has stood firm. So we, with this waiver and with the previous waiver, have sought to stand firm with Iraq as it continues to improve its energy independence, but work with Iraq to get these Iranian funds out of the restricted accounts in Iraq, where Iran is able to leverage Iraq to release this money or transfer it in a way that would potentially not be subject to all of the restrictions that are in place.
Mr. Bailey, I think your use of terms and hiding, in my opinion, behind this need for humanitarian and to support Iraq and all these things, we are dealing with America's greatest terror, and that is the Iranians, and you're giving them cash. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. With that, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses' presence today. And I echo many of the comments made by some of my colleagues in condemning the rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and the hate in all forms here in the United States and abroad. Everyone in this room and across the world saw the gruesome images and heard the heartbreaking stories of those impacted by the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. Attacks like these reinforce that the United States must maintain its steady global leadership abroad and has only strengthened during the Biden administration. Terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah are financed by Iran. There's no question about that, making U.S. sanctions on Iran critically important. We heard testimony today that places focus on 2 sanctions waivers granted by the United States earlier this year. So I want to inquire specifically further about the $6 billion in Iranian funds transferred from South Korean banks to Qatar. Ms. Rosenberg, Secretary Wally Adeyemo told Congress that the U.S. and Qatar have agreed to effectively block the funds and that on a case-by-case applications, the money would be spent under the current arrangement will be denied for foreseeable future. Could you provide specific examples of oversight mechanisms in place where the humanitarian channels are in place to prevent any funds from being used for terrorist financing? I know that I think Mr. Pauly said that not one penny has been spent.
Thank you for the question. It is the case that there have been no transfers out of this from the $6 billion sum held in Qatari financial institutions. So I'll offer an explanation of the measures in place to prevent the diversion to non-humanitarian purposes. There's 3 levels of controls on this restricted fund. So in the first instance, the financial institutions themselves apply their own know your customer and due diligence requirements for the funds. In certain instances, they have adopted a policy to pre-vet potential recipients of funds. These would be firms engaged in agricultural activity, medicine, and medical device supply companies, for example. So they've also, these firms, the financial institutions have also adopted a policy of only letting existing account holders be in the position to receive the funds, which is to say those that have already been onboarded and vetted for customer awareness. So that's one level, is the intensive and enhanced due diligence at the financial institutions. On top of that comes the restrictions from the European Union. So these are the kinds of controls, know your customer and anti-money laundering controls, incumbent upon institutions that operate within the EU. This is because, as noted previously in questions with the chair, the funds are in euros, which means that there's a necessity to, when clearing euro transactions, be in line with European policies on anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. So a second layer of controls has to do with European standards. A third level of controls has to do with the United States and the restrictions that we and the Treasury Department places on these accounts, on these restricted funds. I will note that there's no U.S. nexus to these funds, nor has there been at any point. Nevertheless, we have imposed our own restrictions on these accounts in these institutions, and these Qatari institutions, and this involves our own anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism restrictions. It requires the financial institutions to notify the U.S. Treasury Department whenever they seek to engage in any transfer. And back to your original point, no transfers have so far occurred.
No transfers have occurred.
That's correct.
And Mr. Paley, are you concur or have anything to add to Ms. Rosenberg's response?
I concur with her response. Thank you.
All right. And you said earlier that not one penny has been spent.
That's correct.
Not one penny.
Correct.
I think it's worth repeating because that seems to be a point that some don't seem to hear, and I want to make sure that the public heard that. Not one penny has been spent.
Exactly. Not one penny has been spent from
All right. Well, thank you. And I see my time's running out. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. With that, the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Rose from Tennessee, is acknowledged for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Paley, how has the placing of U.S. Special Envoy to Iran, Robert Malley, on unpaid leave affected your office's ability to effectively function?
Thanks very much for the question. So as the Deputy Special Envoy for Iran at the State Department, I'm in charge of the day-to-day implementation of our Iran policy at the department, and nothing has changed in terms of our implementation of that policy. We work across the department and across the interagency to continue to advance President Biden and Secretary Blinken's focus on countering Iran, which remains a top adversary and state sponsor of terrorism.
Can you provide any clarity as to why Mr. Malley's security clearance was suspended?
Unfortunately, I'm not in a position today to speak to personnel or security clearance issues.
Is that something that perhaps you all could answer in a classified setting?
I know that the department is engaged with this committee and other committees on certain issues related to this case, but today, again, I'm not in a position to speak to security clearance
If it's
issues.
possible to get more clarity on that in that setting, we'd certainly appreciate it. I would.
We will certainly take the question back. Thank you.
All right. In September, the Department of Treasury established what it called a humanitarian channel in Qatar. I think we're all familiar with that action to administer $6 billion in Iranian assets from South Korea. It is described as a way to, quote, further facilitate the flow of humanitarian assistance to the people of Iran. Assistant Secretary Rosenberg, why did Treasury decide to create a quote, humanitarian, unquote, channel as, and is this a common mechanism for Treasury?
Thank you for the question. As to the why, I'd be very happy to defer to my State Department colleague, given that the creation of this particular mechanism was pursuant to a deal on the exchange of detainees between Iran and the United States. I will defer on that. With regard to, is this common practice? Is there precedent for this? In the last administration, there was an effort to establish there was an establishment of a Swiss humanitarian channel to pursue the same goal, which is to say to take Iranian funds, highly restricted, and that could be used only for humanitarian purposes, subject to intense vetting, akin to what I had just described in the prior questioning. So there is precedent for this. This is another example that builds on lessons learned and is in a different jurisdiction.
So practically, and I'll let Mr. Paley, I'll let you clarify as well, but is there a stark difference between a humanitarian channel and other escrow accounts that are available to Iran for humanitarian trade purposes? And either one of you.
I can answer that. So it is the case that there's special conditions around a humanitarian channel understood as such, which is to say the establishment of such a channel is designed and established exclusively for humanitarian payments. And as I was noting before, it can be the case that certain potential recipients of the funds are pre-vetted. They can only be customers of an institution. It's designed for that purpose. Generally speaking, the U.S. law, policy, and sanctions allow for payments, Iran, as well as for other countries subject to intensive sanctions and other programs, to be able to pay for humanitarian transactions. But this is a particularized channel established with conditionality around it, even though it could be permitted to pay for humanitarian goods in a different account, but subject to that would not be an account established exclusively for humanitarian purposes.
And give us some greater sense of what data Treasury is relying on to ensure that the humanitarian channels are the most effective way to get the appropriate assistance to Iranian citizens. How are you measuring that? What's the data source that you use to measure that effectively?
That's an interesting question. I would offer that our highest purpose here is to, and the purpose that guides our policy overall, is to ensure that Iran does not have access to money it can use for terror and destabilization. And so...
Our time has expired, but I would appreciate it if you might expand on that for the record. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. With that, the ranking member from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I reserve and ask that you go to the next member that's available for questioning.
We're sorry, Mr. Green. We're going to have you. This will be our last. This is our last. So it is, unless we are willing to do a second round, which I'm happy to do. I know there's more questions.
Mr. Chair, I would refer you to the committee rules, and I'll quote, "The chair shall, so far as practicable, defer to the ranking member with respect to the order of recognition for minority members. I have no additional minority members, and I reserve, and I ask that you go to a member who is prepared to speak on your side."
Happy to engage in this conversation about our rules. You have control of your side of the aisle. If you don't have any more members, you are the last one. So therefore, it's your turn. I have more members on my side. So, and that's the discretion of the chair. So I'm not doing anything funky with the rules. It's your turn. So. I know you'd like to have the last word, but that's not how this works. We have more members over on this side. The majority is going to get the last word. So, gentleman can bypass his ability to have a question. I'm happy to go to a second round of questioning because I know I certainly have more questions. So, does the gentleman agree to a second round?
The gentleman would ask that the chair adhere to the rules, and in so doing, respect my right to pass. And I appreciate your highly technical terminology of funky, but this is, in my opinion, something that is appropriate under the rules.
The gentleman will understand that I am adhering to the rules, which is you get to determine. You had the ranking member go first. You always nicely defer to your members and always go last on your side of the aisle. If we are ending this hearing, it is the majority's not only right, but because we have enough people over here, as we alternate, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is going to go last. So it is the ranking member's choice as to whether he wants to claim his 5-minute time. We have deferred to the ranking member on his side. We have given him the ability to choose to have their full ranking member. Hold on. Please tell me that you recognize how foolish and childish this is.
Well,
So,
I recognize,
no, sir.
excuse me, allow me to respond to that it was not necessary for you to use the term foolish and childish.
Okay, so the
It was
chair
not.
shall,
I
so
have been
far as
very respectful. Hold on just a
practicable-
moment. I've been very respectful of you. Now you will respect me. Respect me if you don't respect the rules.
Gentleman knows I have full respect for
Well,
him.
then foolish
Which
and
is-
childish
which
is
which
not the
why
way
I
to
was
address a
actually-
member of Congress.
Excuse me, sir, I was actually referring to the staff behind us that was interrupting our proceedings. So,
Well, I will
with that,
defend the staff. I don't think you refer to the staff as foolish.
actually, I did as I turned
Well,
around
you can
looking
do
at
it,
your staff
but
and our
I
staff.
would say to you that that's inappropriate
Okay.
for a member of
So,
Congress.
would the
to refer
gentleman like to
staff.
proceed, or would you like to
The
continue to argue
member,
about the
the
process?
gentleman, the member, I reserve.
So the gentleman, just to be clear, the ruling of the chair will be that the gentleman is forfeiting his 5 minutes. The gentleman from Pennsylvania will be recognized, and that will be the end of the hearing. That is your choice.
I appeal the ruling of the chair.
That is your choice.
I appeal the ruling
If
of the chair.
I haven't done anything yet, I'm giving you your options, or we can continue on with a second round. I'm happy to then go back, if you would like to get the ranking member, or Ms. Garcia, or any of your other members here, happy to do that. But either I'm going to recognize you for your 5 minutes, or I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes, and when the gentleman from Pennsylvania is done, the hearing is done.
So what
is your choice?
May I ask you a question? Would you be so kind as to receive a question as chair?
Absolutely.
So what your contention is that the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be the very last person?
Unless we have more members on our side or your side show up.
Would you hold for a moment, please? Would you?
Happy to.